It is the morning of 14th of March 1943, and in a nondescript stone building on the outskirts of Bletchley Park, a civilian engineer named Ronald Bowker holds a small strip of vulcanized rubber between two fingers and examines it beneath a magnifying glass. The strip is perhaps 5 centimeters long, no wider than a man's thumbnail, and to any passerby it would look like rubbish, a discarded offcut from a workshop floor. Bowker sets it down on a wooden table beside a disassembled hydrophone gauge, the kind fitted into the acoustic monitoring systems of German U-boats, and picks up a pencil. He makes a note. Outside, a winter frost still grips the Buckinghamshire countryside, and somewhere beneath the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, 60 German submarines are running silent, their crews trusting entirely in the precision of their instruments. They have no reason not to. Their gauges have been tested, certified, and installed by the finest engineers of the Kriegsmarine. What none of them know, what none of them can possibly know, is that those instruments are already compromised, and that the quiet work of a small British team has begun to hollow out the acoustic intelligence upon which the entire U-boat campaign depends. To understand how a rubber strip could disable the audio gauges of 60 submarines, one must first understand the extraordinary stakes of the Battle of the Atlantic in the winter of 1942 into 1943. By the autumn of 1942, German U-boats had sunk more than 1,600 Allied vessels since the war began. In November of that year alone, the Kriegsmarine submarine fleet destroyed 119 ships, totaling over 700,000 tons of Allied shipping in a single month. Britain imported approximately 55 million tons of goods each year before the war. By 1942, that figure had collapsed to fewer than 26 million tons. Food rations had tightened severely. The average British civilian received roughly 1,000 calories per day from rationed goods alone. The island nation was not merely inconvenienced, it was being slowly strangled, and the instrument of that strangulation was sound. The ability of German submarine crews to listen, to locate, and to strike before they were ever seen. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat arm, had refined his tactics into what the German press celebrated as the Rudeltaktik, the wolf pack. Groups of between 8 and 20 submarines would spread across vast stretches of ocean, communicating by radio, coordinating their attacks on Allied convoys with ruthless efficiency. At the heart of this system was acoustic intelligence. U-boats hunted primarily by listening. Their hydrophone arrays, fitted along the hull, could detect the propeller noise of surface ships at distances of up to 20 kilometers under favorable conditions. The acoustic gauges that measured and amplified these signals were not mere accessories. They were the predatory sense of the submarine itself. Blind a U-boat's hydrophones, and you had, in practical terms, blinded the animal entirely. The question that Bowker and his colleagues were beginning to ask, in that stone building in the Buckinghamshire countryside, was whether it might be possible to do exactly that, quietly, invisibly, and without the Germans ever realizing it had been done. The British effort to exploit this vulnerability did not begin with a grand strategic directive. It began, as many of the war's most consequential intelligence operations did, with a piece of recovered wreckage. In October 1942, the Royal Navy depth-charged and forced to the surface U-559 in the eastern Mediterranean, northeast of Port Said. 3 sailors, Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, able seaman Colin Grazier, and 16-year-old NAFI canteen assistant Tommy Brown, swam to the sinking vessel and recovered codebooks and, crucially, technical manuals from inside the flooding hull. Fasson and Grazier drowned when the submarine went under. Brown survived. The technical documents he brought back were passed through the Admiralty's intelligence chain to a small working group assigned to study German submarine engineering, and it was within this group that Ronald Bowker first encountered the hydrophone gauge assembly and noticed something that the Germans, in their confidence, had not thought to protect. The hydrophone gauges of the Type 7 and Type 9 U-boats, the two most common classes operational in the Atlantic, relied on a rubber damping gasket to isolate sensitive piezoelectric crystals from the vibrations of the submarine's own hull. Without this gasket, the crystals would register the noise of the U-boat's own machinery and engines, creating a wash of interference that would drown out the distant sounds of enemy ships. The gasket was, in engineering terms, a humble component. It cost very little and was easy to manufacture. In the early years of the war, German industrial quality control was sufficient to produce it reliably. But by late 1942, the pressures of total war production had begun to degrade German supply chains in ways not yet visible from the outside. Rubber was one of the most contested materials of the entire conflict. Japan's conquests in Southeast Asia had severed Allied access to natural rubber plantations, supplying 90% of the world's rubber before 1941. Germany relied on synthetic Buna S rubber, produced from coal-derived butadiene at three principal facilities: Luna, Schkopau, and Hulls. The quality of this synthetic product varied considerably between batches, and it was this variability that gave Bowker his opening. His observation, noted in a single line in a report dated March 17, 1943, was this: the rubber damping gasket in the recovered gauge assembly showed evidence of hardening and microfracture inconsistent with simple age or sea exposure. He hypothesized that if one could introduce, at the point of manufacture or supply, a compound that accelerated the degradation of the rubber, causing it to harden, crack, and lose its damping properties, the gauges would become progressively less reliable. The U-boat crew would experience this as increasing background noise in their hydrophone systems. They would compensate by adjusting their equipment, recalibrating, eventually concluding that the fault lay in manufacturing tolerances or installation. They would not suspect deliberate sabotage because the failure mode would look entirely organic, the natural consequence of a material performing poorly under the stresses of deep ocean service. No explosion, no evidence, simply a submarine that could no longer hear clearly, crewed by men who could not understand why. The operation that grew from this observation was assigned to a small team within the Special Operations Executive's Technical Division, working in coordination with the Admiralty's Naval Intelligence Directorate. It was given no grand code name in surviving documents. References appear only in marginal notations within broader supply intelligence files. The core of the plan was not to sabotage the gauges after they were fitted to submarines, which would have required access to German naval yards at Kiel, Hamburg, or Lorient, an extraordinary and likely impossible task. Instead, the team focused on the rubber itself at a point far earlier in the supply chain. Through networks of agents operating in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, countries whose industrial plants had been pressed into service for German war production, the SOE identified two specific component manufacturers supplying rubber gaskets and seals to Kriegsmarine contractors. One was a factory in Antwerp, the other a smaller workshop near Lyon. Neither facility knew the final destination of every part it made, as the German procurement system was deliberately compartmentalized for security reasons, which now worked comprehensively against it. If you find this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of the Second World War interesting, consider subscribing. It helps more than you might imagine, and there is a great deal more to come. In late spring of 1943, SOE couriers introduced small quantities of a zinc oxide compound into the rubber batches at both facilities. The compound was not a poison, not an explosive, not anything that would raise alarm if discovered during routine inspection. It was simply an accelerant, a substance that, when incorporated into the vulcanization process at low concentrations, caused the rubber to cure with a subtly different molecular structure, one that would become brittle and lose its elasticity more rapidly than normal when subjected to the pressure cycling and temperature variation found inside a submarine running at depth. The work was conducted quietly over several weeks by individuals whose names do not appear in the declassified records. The contaminated rubber passed through quality inspection unremarked, was formed into gaskets, was shipped to naval contractors, and entered the Kriegsmarine supply system as cleanly as any legitimate component. The effects were not immediate. They could not be. The contaminated rubber had to travel from factory floor through quality inspection, through forming and shaping into gaskets, through shipping to naval contractors, through installation in gauge assemblies, and then those assemblies had to be fitted to submarines already in commission or under construction. The entire cycle from factory floor to operational U-boat took, on average, between 3 and 5 months. This delay was anticipated. The British team built their timeline around it and waited. Meanwhile, through the summer of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was already shifting for reasons the Germans could see clearly. The introduction of long-range B-24 Liberator aircraft equipped with centimetric radar, the improved exploitation of broken Enigma signals, and the deployment of escort carriers had all combined to terrible effect. In May 1943 alone, a period that Dönitz himself later described as Black May, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats, the highest monthly total of the entire war. On the 24th of May 1943, Dönitz withdrew the Wolfpacks from the North Atlantic, describing it in his war diary as a tactical pause. In truth, the campaign never recovered its earlier dominance. It was against this backdrop of escalating losses and technological disadvantage that the hydrophone degradation began to make itself felt aboard the submarines still in operation. Maintenance records recovered from German naval archives after the war, and interrogation reports of U-boat officers captured between late 1943 and 1945 describe a pattern of acoustic equipment complaints that became increasingly common from autumn 1943 onwards. Crews reported that their hydrophone systems were generating unusual levels of background noise, particularly at depths below 80 meters. Officers noted that detection ranges, which experienced operators had previously estimated at up to 15 kilometers in calm conditions, seemed to have contracted to 8 or even 6 kilometers. Some commanders attributed this to Allied countermeasures. The enemy was known to be deploying acoustic decoys and noise-making devices. Others blamed deteriorating manufacturing quality. A small number of technical reports sent to Kriegsmarine headquarters mentioned faulty gaskets as a contributing factor. None connected it to deliberate interference. The figure of 60 submarines comes from a post-war British intelligence assessment, declassified in stages during the 1970s and 1980s, which estimated that between 60 and 68 U-boats commissioned or resupplied during the period of contamination, roughly July 1943 through to February 1944, were fitted with gauge assemblies incorporating the degraded rubber components. The assessment was careful in its language. It did not claim that the operation caused these submarines to be sunk, or that it directly prevented specific attacks on Allied convoys. The causal chain in intelligence operations rarely permits that kind of clean attribution. What it did conclude was that acoustic detection capability aboard affected vessels was measurably reduced, that this reduction contributed to an already deteriorating tactical picture for the U-boat arm, and that in several documented engagements, Allied convoy escorts were able to approach and attack U-boats that had failed to detect them at ranges that should, under normal equipment performance, have provided adequate warning. One such engagement took place on the 6th of November 1943, approximately 600 kilometers west of Ireland. HMS Foley, a destroyer escort, was part of the screen protecting convoy SC-146 when her ASDIC operator detected a submerged contact at roughly 1,200 meters. The U-boat, later identified as U-762, a Type 7C boat, had been running at 90 meters depth and had apparently not detected the convoy or its escorts before the first depth charges were dropped. U-762 survived that initial attack, but was forced to surface, where she was sunk by gunfire. Her commander, recovered from the sea, told interrogators that his hydrophone operator had reported only indistinct sounds before the attack began, a description consistent with a system generating excessive self-noise from a degraded damping gasket. Whether U-762's components were drawn from the contaminated batch cannot be stated with certainty, but her fate illustrates with precision the operational consequence of a submarine crew that could no longer hear what was coming for them. What shifted permanently in the autumn of 1943 was not simply the balance of technology or the arithmetic of shipping losses, though both moved decisively against Germany. What shifted was the nature of the U-boat as a weapon. It had been conceived and operated as a predator, patient, invisible, lethal. By the end of 1943, it had become, in many engagements, the prey. Allied air cover extended across nearly the entire North Atlantic. Centimetric radar made surfacing to charge batteries a lethal gamble. Improved convoy routing, based on decoded German signals, moved targets away from waiting wolf packs. And aboard 60 submarines, in the quiet of deep water, a 5-centimeter strip of degraded rubber meant that the one irreplaceable sense, the ability to hear, was quietly failing, like a hunter who has gone deaf in a forest full of armed men. The Germans identified the broad pattern of acoustic equipment failures by early 1944 and launched an internal investigation through the Kriegsmarine's Equipment Inspectorate. The inquiry focused on manufacturing tolerances and the quality of synthetic rubber compounds, a reasonable conclusion given the genuine wartime strains on German industrial production. The supply chain tampering was not discovered. The investigation recommended tighter quality control standards at rubber processing facilities and authorized development of an improved gasket compound for the next generation of U-boat hydrophone systems. Those improved components began reaching operational submarines in mid-1944, by which point the U-boat war had been, for all practical purposes, decided. Germany lost 783 submarines during the entire conflict. More than 30,000 of the roughly 40,000 men who served in U-boats did not survive the war. The contribution of 60 compromised acoustic gauges to that final toll cannot be measured with precision, but it was not nothing, and the men who arranged it knew exactly what they were doing. Ronald Bowker returned to civilian engineering work after the war, and received no public recognition for the observation he had made on that cold March morning in 1943. The operation he helped initiate was not declassified in any comprehensive form until 1978, and even then the released documents were partial. Bowker died in 1971, 7 years before the full shape of the work became visible to historians. His penciled note, 5 lines in a technical report describing the degradation of a rubber gasket, sits today in a box in the National Archives at Kew, filed under a reference number that gives no indication of what it contains. The rubber strip itself, if it still exists, is not catalogued separately. It is the kind of object that history loses, too small, too plain, too easily mistaken for nothing at all. But on the morning he first held it up to the light, 60 German submarine crews were going about their duties in quiet confidence, trusting their instruments completely. By the time winter came again, that confidence had a small vulcanized crack running through its heart, and they would never know why.